We've got 3 more comics from my community that we're going to do critiques for. So stick around and make sure that you click the links in the description to read or follow the artists who've made them. Let's get straight into the first one with Airworthy. So this is Airworthy. It's by Ben Lewis, and this is a really, really, really good comic. This is one of the best examples that I can find where talent and art and storytelling and those things, they're not the things that are holding progress back. Because the comic, for my money, that comic is as good as the comics that you've got on your bookshelf. Any of you watching this, the comics that you've got on your bookshelf, if this comic was on that same bookshelf, it wouldn't look out of place, in my view. Now, I can't show you all the pages, but even in this rough form, because I'm only going to show you this page here and the page below, due to the request from the artist. But I've seen much more on this, and I can tell you that it's going to be fantastic, because if it looks good in this stage where it's still very thumbnail and very loose and rough, it's going to look fantastic when it's finished baking in the oven. But speaking of baking, enough glazing. Let's tear Ben apart, because if there's one thing we all hate, it's an artist with any self-esteem. So let's address that immediately. So the first thing that Ben was worried about was whether the exposition is clear. Now, for those who don't know, exposition is essentially when a character explains what's going on in the plot or the backstory or the world building through dialogue rather than through action. It's tell rather than show. The general rule is you should show, not tell, which is one of the reasons why exposition has kind of a bad reputation, because you should always show, not tell, whereas exposition does the opposite of that. The reason I wanted to explain that, partly because I didn't want to assume that everybody knew what exposition was, but I also wanted to explain it because I don't have that much to say about this comic, as you'll realize as I go through this. So I'll address the exposition first. No, I don't think there's too much exposition. I think sometimes, particularly in a more adult comic, which this is, I would say that this is not for kids. So having more text is totally valid and totally appropriate for the audience. So from that perspective, fine. The fact that this is not the norm is also fine, because if this was the norm, then maybe you'd think, okay, there is a lot of dialogue going on here and it's going to slow the entire comic down. That's not the case. So I think the exposition is absolutely fine as it is. Now, the other thing was about the word balloon placement and being able to follow the dialogue. Now, I would say that this looks quite complicated to begin with, but I think, again, it tracks, it follows, right? All of these follow. I've read everything as far as I'm aware in the correct order. So I've got no complaints with that either. The only thing that I could nitpick, and again, this is nitpicking, is maybe the justification is a bit inconsistent, where you've got center justified here, but then you've got left justified here, right justified here. I understand the reason why that is. It's not anything that I would even necessarily change. I was just trying to find things to critique. However, a slightly more valid critique was this. So let me just double check that you can see what I see. Yes, you can. The word balloon, well, not the word balloon, the dialogue that I changed, and it's a very, very small change, is this here. So one of the things that we do quite a lot, I think, is we can sometimes miss the pacing of the dialogue. We focus on the pacing of the panels and the pacing of the page, but sometimes we can miss the pacing of the dialogue and the acting of the dialogue as well. So when I first read this line here, Felix and I, we became close. That jarred with me for some reason. I don't know why, because it just felt quite abrupt, or I don't know. It's hard to explain. I'm not an actor, obviously, but Felix and I, we became close. I suppose that does work now that I'm saying it out loud. But when I first read it, I was like, maybe I would have Felix and I, and then a pause, and then we became, and then a pause, and then close. But maybe not. See, this is what I mean. This is exactly what I'm talking about, right? I'm glad I kind of flubbed that bit, because it goes to show that you can read and interpret comics in 1,000 different ways, right? You can read and interpret dialogue in 1,000 different ways. I wrote this, my notes for this a couple of days ago before recording this, and I've changed my mind on it, on that line in particular. And I've changed that literally in this moment as I'm recording that. So everyone can change their mind all the time. And that's the reason why you have to trust your own judgment, because the same person has interpreted that line of dialogue in 2 completely different ways. So ignore me is what I'm saying, I guess. Everyone ignore me. Stop watching the video, unsubscribe. I'm a fraud. Please don't do those things. However, what this does bring us on to is one of the characters, Ramirez. So this character here is Ramirez. And Ramirez is Spanish. And do I want to tell you this yet? I'm not going to tell you this yet. First of all, I want you to read this. Okay, well, I'll read it to you. So, Fury hit, Fury crash. Ramirez thinks Susie dead. Now Susie see what Ramirez see. Susie not dead, but Susie not militia prisoner. Have you shown these to anyone? Who is silly man with chief? Now, Ramirez is Spanish, and Ramirez refers to himself in the third person. The first one is just his nationality. The second one is part of his personality. The risk that you have, and everyone has when they're writing a character where English is not their first language, is you can make them feel and come across as less intelligent or lesser than the native speakers. And that is a really fine line to tread, and it can be very, very dicey. I think you fall on the right side of that, and there are a couple of reasons why. So, in order to avoid you being offensive with a foreign character, you don't want them to mispronounce words. I wouldn't say anything stereotypically Spanish within his dialogue, which you don't do. But what you do to show that English is not his first language is you drop articles. This is a very, very good way of doing it. So Fury hit is fine because Spanish speakers often can struggle with articles. So instead of saying Fury was hit, you just say Fury hit. And who is silly man instead of who is the silly man, So you drop those articles to make it, to sell the fact that he is speaking English, but with a Spanish accent, or at least a Spanish way of processing language in his head. And it sort of enriches the character rather than presents the character as this is the Spanish guy and there's nothing else about his personality. Also, the fact that he's capable as well and he's intelligent and he's not just a caricature, all those things I think fantastic. Because I know that you had concerns about Ramirez and whether he read how you intended him to be read. In my opinion, the answer is yes. I think he absolutely reads in that way. So they're the comic related things that you had spoken about. I think when it comes to the craft of creating comics, when it comes to drawings, when it comes to visual storytelling, when it comes to web balloon placement, all of that stuff, they are not blockers for you at all. And I sincerely hope you know that, because I think the biggest problem you have has nothing to do with the craft of creating comics. It's to do with your own viewpoint of your own work, that inner critic, that self-critic that you have. And it's something that I have noticed before, because obviously I've spoken to Ben before, and he's really, really good. He's so good at what he does. And this is a clear example of that. And I hope you can all see it as well and agree that this is absolutely fantastic work. And I feel like, and I could be completely wrong here, so please call me out in the comments if I am wrong. But I think that because this comic has been built up for years and years and years, and it's, hard graft, this comic, where you're agonizing over the little things. And the longer that this comic goes on, the more pressure there is to get it right. Because if you release this and it falls below your expectations, then you've wasted years of work on it, right? Like, if you're going to spend a lot of time on something, it needs to be cooked properly before you release it. And I understand that logic, but that just makes the process longer, and the comic becomes heavier and heavier to the point where you just want it to be finished so then you can explore new ideas, and you're stuck with this albatross because you also don't want to rush this, because if you rush it, then you're worried that it might not reach your own standards. So you're kind of stuck with it. You're stuck in this limbo where you can't escape it. And the comic that you clearly have a lot of love for starts to become more of a burden than a passion. So I want to present two options for you, because I think that either of these two options would be beneficial. Actually, there's three options. So option one, complete chapter one. And I mean, take it through to the end stage. Don't worry about chapter 2 and beyond for now. Just complete chapter 1 so it's ready for publishing. That's what your target is. And I imagine you have a good, or at least a rough idea of how long that's going to take you to do, of how long your process is, which means that you can put a rough deadline on this as well. So you've got a thing to aim for and a deadline to aim for as well. So that's option 1. Option 2 is finish chapter 2, and for every 3 or 4 pages, post them in the Discord and ask if people can follow along with what you're intending. Now, if you decide to do that, in general, by the way, if you decide to do that and you either don't get a response or you don't get one that fully vibes with you or you fully agree with, then the default position is that you are correct and that your initial decision is the right one. So whatever page you presented to the Discord, if people aren't convincing you that their idea is either as good or better, your idea is better. Absolutely think like that, because otherwise you'll never get this done. Option 3, completely ignore me and carry on doing what you're doing. You don't have to take my advice on board at all, obviously. But I want everyone else in the comments who have watched this far to remind Ben just how good he is, because sometimes you do need that. Like, you shouldn't, obviously, and I'm not saying he hasn't presented his comic for me to glaze him. He's not expecting me to do this. I hope he's suitably embarrassed, but sometimes you do need that reminding that, yeah, you are good enough, like more than good enough, and your decisions, your creative output is good enough, and it's good enough to be completed rather than agonized over. So yeah, give some love to Ben in the comments, and there's a link in the description to his Instagram, so go give him a follow there as well and appreciate his work. Right, next. Okay, so this is Oyal, Oyal by Compton. So I had a long think about this comic. Let me pull this up for you. There we go. I'll slowly go through the thumbnails as I talk. So you're in a similar position to Ben, where I don't think the art is the main issue facing you. Now, to be fair, it's not the main issue facing most comics, because you don't need to be a great artist to create a great comic. But it is clear that you have a good understanding of how to draw, and me nitpicking some errors here and there, I don't think is going to help that much. Because what I see from your thumbnails is somebody who doesn't have a working process when it comes to comics. Now, I think, based on these, that you're someone who works on certain pages when they feel like it. Not to say that you're lazy, but I think you're someone who will work on a page and then you'll leave it and move on to other pages, then come back and rework that same page or panel. That's what I'm seeing in these panels. And because you don't have an abundance of time, I think we need to focus on your comic process rather than me pointing to a page and saying, this is good, this is bad, because that's not going to tackle the underlying issue here. And I think the way to do it is, I think you need to simplify everything. Stay with me, because I know a lot of people can resist this. But I think that you're someone who feels that they can draw really well, and clearly you can. Like, some of these shots are really good. Like, clearly you know how to draw. Clearly you have a certain level of skill that you're comfortable with, and that is above average, I would say. But the problem is that your comic making skills are not matching your drawing skills. And that's totally okay, because you've not been making comics for long enough for those skills to catch up with your drawing skills. And it can feel like you're taking a step backwards when I say something like you need to simplify, because you're not used to simplifying, because you know how to think in complex and abstract ways when it comes to drawing, because you're clearly very good at that. But you need to almost think the opposite when it comes to comic creation. And that can feel like you're taking that step back, but you're not, I promise. Because I don't see a process here. I can't see the way you're working. I just see a collection of pencils. Some are detailed and some aren't, and that's it. I don't have a clear indication of speech bubbles or story or spatial clarity in the panels. And so I cannot, as the reader and as the critiquer, I cannot follow this as a comic. The only thing I can do with this is critique the art, which again, I don't think will help you. Now, I'm not suggesting that you throw these pages out and start again, because I don't think you have to do that. But what I would do is take a small sheet of paper, not Bristol board or comic board or anything, just some copy paper, and draw little thumbnails on it. Draw a little, just little squares. And in those squares, draw very basic but very clear ideas for your panels. Do not bother with like the interesting perspective or abstract visuals yet. Be overly basic. For example, let's say, in fact, I'm going to draw this out because we all like a visual. Where is my pen? Boom. Right. So let's say that you're seeing I'll write the word scene up here, involves a character going from point A to point B. Like point A to point B. So they're going from one location to another. Let's just say that's what the scene is. And along the way, somebody tries to shoot them. I don't know. So you've got your little thumbnail drawings or rectangles here, boxes, whatever they're called. Now, obviously, yours are going to look a lot better than mine. So literally, when you're drawing these out, I want you to draw them like as basic as this. So character 1, maybe even draw an arrow to literally indicate which direction they're going. And maybe you can draw this here to show that they're going this way. Maybe you put some background elements in. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's an alleyway or something. I don't know. And then the third panel is your man with a gun. They're getting ready to shoot our man. We've got our man walking. We've got this fella, he's got his gun. He's going to shoot our man. Oh no. Oh no. And then maybe he runs. Then we've got a close up of the gun maybe. Sorry, I'm having way too much fun with this. That's a gun. Bang. And maybe we fade to black or something. I don't know, something like that. So what this does is it strips away all of the clever stuff. So you're clever, okay? Because you have a lot of artistic knowledge and skill and expertise to lean on, so you can be quite clever. I want you to strip all of that away, because I think that's getting in the way of clarity. And doing it this way gets rid of all of that. And now what you can do is you can look at this series of panels and you can say, okay, well, let's say that I want to build up this reveal of the man with the gun a bit more. So I'm going to add in extra panel here, or maybe even an extra panel here, or maybe a panel over here as well. And you can start to play around with it really quickly and really easily. Maybe for this shot here, where your man is pointing the gun at our hero, maybe this one could be like an overhead shot. Maybe this one here could be a shot where you're looking up at him. I don't know. And this is where you can decide to tell what you want to do with the camera, where you want to position the camera. What this allows you to do, this process, this way of planning out your visual story, is that it ensures that you're telling the story to the audience as your primary goal and being clever and artistic as your secondary goal. So you can still include the close-up, the visual metaphors, the challenging perspective, but it's grounded in clear storytelling. If you're not sure how to balance all of that, then go for clear storytelling, even if that feels boring to you. It won't feel boring to your audience. You can get clever and artsy, particularly with the comics cover and the marketing artwork. So if you feel that goes against your artistic integrity, maybe, or you just feel like, oh, I just don't want to do that, then indulge in your artistic side and your more fanciful and clever side in that side of things, in the marketing and the cover. But make sure that the artwork and not the artwork, but the visual storytelling is clear within the comic. I hope that makes sense. What this also does, and probably one of the easiest ways to sell it to you, is that when you get to your pages, like you've done this exercise and you get to working on your pages, you have such a much better idea of how to translate what is the script into the visuals. If you're going from script to these pencils here, which are quite detailed, without this step in between, it's going to be very easy for you to sort of get lost in your own process. You're going to feel like you'll get to a certain part in the page and then you'll start to lose faith in it. And then you start to lose concentration and you think, okay, I'm going to move on to a different page, or I'm going to move on and do something else for a while. And then you come back to it. And I think that's why you've got that very, very start-stop nature with your process. There isn't like a single linear process from script to the visuals on the page. So this is where I got the idea of the gun, because I saw this page that you had someone with a gun. I was like, oh yeah, let's steal that idea. So This is a really good example of how I feel this exercise would help you. So I know that this character, so let me show you that this character, I assume it's this character, is getting a gun and is going to point it at someone or something. But that is all I know. I don't know what's being said because I can't really read the writing. And I don't know if this person is alone or are there other people in the room. I don't know where they are, what the environment is, and the posing and the staging is quite disorienting. So I would take a page like this and I'd try thumbnailing out this exact scene on a small piece of paper. Now, don't worry about the number of panels. Do as many panels as you want. Do 20 panels if you need to. And don't worry necessarily about the exact sequence of events. Like add in panels in between what you've got here just to really be very clear in what's going on. And then you can look at it and be like, okay, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that. I'm going to change that. I'm going to combine that. And you can think more a bit like a director or an editor and do that until it starts to become intuitive. Because when you've been making comics for a while, you'll do that process kind of in your own mind's eye. And as you're thumbnailing out your pages, you're kind of doing this all at the same time. In the same way that when you first learned to draw, you didn't jump straight into the advanced techniques, right? You started off relatively basic and then built on that foundation to then work your way to those advanced techniques. This is very similar. And the final thing is that just remember that your audience needs to know what's going on in the panel more often than not. So reading comics isn't about looking at nice or impressive art. That's a nice to have. And which is what your comic is. These are nice to haves, but they don't have any clear storytelling, which is a need to have. So if you can tighten up your storytelling process and practice that a little bit more, then you'll create a comic that's more accessible than this one. You'll get faster at doing it and you'll find it less daunting, frustrating, and inconsistent. You've already got the art skills. You just need to apply them in this new context of sequential storytelling. Once you're ready and once you've sort of started to develop these panels and this story and you put it out there, I think people will really, really enjoy it. I don't have a link for this one in the description, but Compton, if you want to add a link in the comments, then please, or tell people where they can see more of your work, then please do, so people can appreciate your work. Because it's good, like clearly, very, very good artist, right? And that's intriguing. Like, I'm intrigued by the story. So you've got the building blocks, you've just got to put it all together. Next comic. So this comic we have, so this comic is by Connor Immonen and it is called Hew and Cry. Hew and Cry. So they're quite experienced in general and this is their first comic project. They work quite regularly on it and they are committed to finishing it, which is great to see. So first impressions of this comic. Actually, I'm going to start with the website itself. I really like this website. It's really nice. I'd also bet that you're a Mike Mignola fan because this is very Mike and they're really, really nice. I really, really like these. Then again, I love Mike's style, so maybe I'm a bit biased, but really, really nice. So first impressions, it looks professional. It looks really nice. Great first impression. Now, on to the comic itself. You said that your major pain points are lighting and lettering. So let's look at those one at a time. Now, there wasn't anything like super specific you asked for or about, but you said you had a shallow understanding of lighting, coloring, and lettering. And I could make this critique really quick and just tell you that you're wrong. You don't have a shallow understanding, but that feels unfair, even though it's true. Because I do think you've got a really good understanding of lighting and color. Now, is there room to grow? Of course. But I think that this is the case of the artist seeing all of their flaws and the readers not noticing them. In other words, you're being too hard on yourself. So when we look at this page, in fact, I'm going to bring this into Clip Studio Paint because I will be able to show you something pretty cool. Here we go. Let me switch over to Clip Studio Paint. Let's move me over here. Get me out of the way. Cool. If I were in your position, it's not the color that I'd look at first, it's the values. Because fixing or modifying your values is a great way to fix your colors without being overwhelmed by colors. So one of the things that I tend to do is I'll add a layer above everything else and fill it with black. Then I'll turn that layer to saturation and it turns everything black and white. Let me show you. So this is a Feng Zhu trick, the concept artist. So you literally fill it with black and in your layer blending modes, you go down to saturation. I think most applications will have this or a variation of this. And then what you can do is just turn it on and off, and you're going from color to black and white. So you can check your values really quickly and really easily. Now, I think what's happened here is because you're probably, I mean, maybe not as zoomed in as you're seeing it on your screen, but on my screen, this looks normal. But you're probably quite close to this as you're drawing it and you're coloring it in, as we all are, right? Because you have to be quite close. And close up, that looks all right, because close up, if I just color pick these two values, that looks all right. That looks like a fairly decent amount of contrast without it being, too extreme. But then when we zoom out, it kind of blends really, it blends quite a lot, right? And it's really hard to see where that shadow is and see where that shadow is. And it kind of disappears. And it's the same, although I think it's probably worse, for this field here. So this field here, we've got, this is our local color, and then this as our shadow color. You can see that there we go. We can see that those two values are very, very similar, especially when we zoom out. You can barely tell the difference between them, right? So this is how we can increase the contrast slightly without having to think about color at all. And this can really help you separate those concepts out. So for example, obviously it's going to be difficult for me to do this because this is just a flat layer, but presumably you have your flats that you can select more easily. But all you would need to do is, let's just select this shadow bit beforehand. We don't even need to look at the color. So let's turn on the saturation, and then let's just darken it. So I'm using the Control U. So I use Control U, and I'm going to darken this by turning down the luminosity. Okay. So now we can see that there's a bit more contrast between where the sun is hitting the top, presumably, and then this cast shadow is here. Let's turn this off, and you can see that you see what I mean? But this is something that I would genuinely add to your practice in general, is creating that layer, that saturation layer, and putting it above everything else so that you can turn it on and off, and you can double check your values by doing that really, really quickly and really, really easily. Now, I do actually want to stay on this page because there's something I really love. So that was about color and lighting and stuff. But just to give you a bit more evidence as to why you're perhaps being a little bit harsh on yourself, is this. I loved, when I first noticed this panel, I loved this panel because you're, again, showing that you understand color and light really well, and also texture. Like, it looks like the light is going through the trees and the leaves and hitting these people in the foreground. Whether you meant to do that or not, I don't know, but that's what the effect is interpreted by me to do. I think it was really nice, really, really, really nice. So again, it's one of those things where the main thing that I would focus on, I guess for you, is to increase the contrast a little bit and check your values. But that's it. In fact, I'm going to go back to the website because there is a panel that further proves that you do know what you're talking about when it comes to color. So if we go back 3 pages, 1, I mean, that's great already. 2, cool cover. 3. I mean, look, does that look like someone who doesn't understand color? I don't think so. I'm not trying to invalidate your feelings. Obviously, if you feel that way, you feel that way. But I'm here to tell you, and comments, please agree or disagree with me, but I know you will agree. You know how to do color. Like, I think you're doing an absolutely fantastic job with it. And just keep going. It's at this point, I think it is a case of like, you've clearly got a really strong foundation. It's just building upon that foundation. Now, all of that being said, drama curve. I forget. Here we go. So the page prior to that one, we've got the lettering to deal with. Now, there are a couple of things to say about the lettering. So the lettering could do with a bit more TLC here. I'm not going to comment on the font. I assume it's a font that you have permission to use, which is great. My thing with fonts in general is, can I read it? And if the answer is yes, then it's a good font. I might have personal preferences over certain fonts, but ultimately that's the main thing that matters, right? Sorry, any letterers watching this, I'm aware that there is nuance and there's art and lettering, but for the purposes of this video, clarity is the only thing that matters for the letters. And nobody cares about you anyway. So there are a few things you can do here, but I will say that if you don't sort out your word balloons while you're thumbnailing and they become an afterthought, you're going to end up hurting the readability of your comic page. So that's my first sort of overarching thing when it comes to letters and word balloons. Do them while, or agree where they're going to be while you're thumbnailing, not afterwards. I don't know if you do that as part of your process or not. I'm not sure. I'm just saying, make sure that that becomes part of your process, because word balloons are just as important as the artwork. So in fact, I'm going to bring this into Clip Studio Paint. We need to do a little bit of work here. Specifically, I'm talking about this panel here. That's the only one I'm going to look at, and you'll see why. Bloop. Okay, so let's get rid of that page, and bloop. There we go. So I sort of did a very brief, very quick redraw. As you can see, it is fantastic. There are a couple of things with word balloons, or with these word balloons. So when you've got word balloons with this here, let me zoom into this. When you've got these two dashes, effectively that means that the speech or the dialogue has been interrupted or is stopping quite abruptly. And conversely, when you've got dialogue that has 3 ellipses, so 3 little dots like that, that usually means that there's a longer pause or that the words are sort of trailing off a little bit. So there's stuff that we can do with like comic grammar that can change the way that our characters are saying words. So what I would suggest with this is, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, I feel that there is perhaps a slight overuse of the double dash. Again, this is just my preference, so feel free to disagree, but I wanted to show you the different ways that you can have a character say the same thing and how we can also use word balloons to enhance that as well. So what I've done is I've written out different ways that this character can say the same thing, okay? So here you would read it presumably as, please, my wife, you have to understand. Like, relatively like boom, 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 boom. Then here we've got like, please, my wife, you have to understand. So can you see it's kind of musically, and think about the pacing and the acting a little bit. There's another way we can do it. Like, please, my wife, you have to understand. So a little bit different. And the third way, please, my wife, you have to understand. That's the original, okay? So do you see the difference? I'd forgotten I had done that one. So do you see the difference that we can add in just from using different bits of grammar? It's really, really cool. Now, whichever one you want is up to you. I think all 3 of them are correct. This is a subjective choice, but I just wanted to show that there are different ways that you can have a character say things based on the grammar and based on ellipses versus those double dashes. Now, I would, if I were doing these word balloons, I would do it like this. And the reason why I would do it like this is because this is sort of like a single thought, I guess, a single piece of dialogue. And so I want them to be connected. This is like 2 separate thoughts, and I just felt that they were too disconnected. So I wanted to connect them a little bit. So that's the first reason why I did that. The second reason I did it, because one, it centers everything there a bit more, and sort of, I don't know, it just looks aesthetically nicer as well, I think. But also it means that I have the opportunity to do this. So for the original, because you've got these double dashes here, I would expect him to be interrupted by something, but he's not, because there's too much space between what he's saying and what she's saying, right? Because these dashes are okay. I mean, that dash, again, that's another reason to have that a bit closer. But the dashes, this dash here is fine, because it's like he's interrupting himself. He's like, my wife, you have to understand, he's kind of panicking a bit. That's the way I kind of interpreted his dialogue. Whereas if you do it where her speech is literally overlapping his speech, then it's interrupting it much more explicitly. So that's the other reason why I would do it. So that's how we can use word balloons to, again, enhance the speech and enhance the reader's enjoyment of the speech as well. Final thing that we can do is we can use, so I'm just going to focus on this section of the dialogue and watch what happens when I mess with just one of these words. So if I'll take this word here and I'm going to hit it with a bold, italics, I'm going to increase its size slightly. So now that says, my wife, you have to understand. Cool. That's a different way of saying it. Maybe we do the same for this one. Make it a bit bigger. My wife, you have to understand. What about this one? My wife, you have to understand. Do you see what I mean? It's really, really cool and really fun to just mess around. But if you enhance or emphasize certain words within a sentence, you can play with the volume and just play with the emphasis of the characters, rather than just thinking, okay, I'm putting all of my efforts into the visuals. Use the words and use the letters and use these sorts of techniques, and definitely spend some time studying this, because I was joking before, letterers can really enhance a comic and really just take it to that next level just through the letters. Like, they are extremely important, and they are very, very influential on how the readers interpret the drama and interpret the characters. So I would definitely I'd spend the next couple of weeks just learning lettering. Everything else, I think you're good. Genuinely, I think you're good. I think obviously everything can always be improved all the time, forever. But I think from a visual point of view, I think you're good. I think your lettering needs to catch up with that. So focus on the lettering, definitely. Yeah, I think this is a comic that a lot of people are going to really, really enjoy. And I think you're setting a pretty good standard for everybody else in the community for what a completed comic should look like. The fact is, you're doing it, you're publishing it, you're putting it out there. That's more than what a lot of people do. So I think you should be extremely proud of yourself. And yeah, keep going, just study lettering. And I really look forward to seeing how this develops. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me your comics and trusting me with your comics as well, because I know it's not easy. I don't know how I'd feel about this. And I hope everyone else goes and checks out the work from these very, very good and talented creators. And if you want to see more of these critique videos, then you can click the playlist that's on screen. And thanks very much, and I'll see you later.